Hi everyone, I'm Ava and I'm an American living in the Netherlands. And today I wanted to talk to you about finding a place to rent in this wonderful tiny country. Before I do need to take a sip of my coffee because it is a wonderful fall morning today. And by that I mean it was so dark that I had trouble waking up. I cannot wait for daylight savings on Sunday where we gain an extra hour. That's great. But also it will be lighter when I wake up. I mean, I have to say, I was not prepared for how dark it is in the mornings where I live in Utrecht in the Netherlands. Because in the US, I kind of lived in New York and DC and some places in between, and it's not that dark in the mornings. It does get dark early, but in the mornings, not so much. So when I moved here, I was like, ooh, I'm not exactly a sunshine and butterflies type person. Like my soul is dark and grimy. You may not have guessed, but yes, my soul is dark and grimy. And then when I moved here, I was like, oh, this is dark in the mornings. Too dark even for me. And I have to say, I was a bit relieved. It was a good thing that I moved here and discovered that because I went like, oh, I guess I'm human. And I was really starting to question that because before then I was all about the darkness and the rain and the cold, and I still am, but apparently it can get too dark even for me. So that was not related to the video. So what I wanted to share with you today has more to do with the cultural differences between renting in the US and the Netherlands versus the housing crisis that is happening in the Netherlands, because there is a housing crisis, there is a housing shortage. I will mention that briefly because it kind of sets the backdrop to some of these cultural differences that I've noticed, and I almost wanted to do cultural differences in quotes because some of these things might be an outcome of that, but these other things have to do with cultural differences. So I'm really curious to hear, as always, what you're going to think about this, because I think many of us go through the process of renting at least once or twice in our lives, right? And in my case, I did not expect to see such vast differences in terms of the whole process, also what is expected of you when you decide to rent in the US versus the Netherlands. So let us actually start with the context of renting in the Netherlands and the context behind renting in the US. And by context, I mean just the background, like what is the country experiencing in its rental markets. Now, in the Netherlands, there is just a huge housing crisis. Like I said, getting this out of the way. So if you are here looking for a place, expect crazy competition. People simply cannot find a place to live in the Netherlands. And this is especially true for internationals. So if you move to the Netherlands and if you are a student or someone with a limited budget, it will of course be more difficult for you because everyone is kind of fighting to find affordable housing. I would say this is harder for students than maybe internationals who are moving from a different country for a job because, well, students don't have jobs. They're students. Maybe they have part-time work, but that is not enough to cover their rent. But even if they had enough to maybe cover their rent, the prices have just soared for students when they're trying to find a room. It's been all over the news. And if you are international and you are a student, in the US, you would be placed in housing. There's student housing, and I'll get into that in a minute. But in the Netherlands, about 25 to 50% of international students actually get housing on campus, and that housing is temporary. Even now after COVID, international students don't have the option of following online classes because many of the universities now are phasing out of it in the Netherlands. Interesting because, well, if you're international, you don't have an option that national students have when they're attending university in the Netherlands, even though the housing crisis affects them as well. And that is that international students cannot live at home. Could you imagine? Hi, I'm Ava and I'm commuting from the US. It's not possible. Okay, but students in general are really affected by this to the point where I have seen some quite unexpected stuff on the internet. I think I made it sound worse than it is. But when I was looking for this apartment, I was part of very many Facebook groups to sort of share available housing. I was told that that was one way I could find maybe housing that wasn't very highly priced for expats in the Netherlands. So I joined these groups. And what I saw was a number of students would post things like, my hostel bed is now available. So if you want to take over my hostel bed, that is open for you. And then people would respond to this post about hostel beds saying, oh my God, I would love your hostel bed. I was in shock. So that kind of stuck with me, and I wanted to share this anecdote with you because I was really surprised. Are you surprised? Do you think this is normal? Like, did you expect this to be the case here? Now, using this as a nice segue path to what the situation is like in the US, if you are an international student in the US, you get student housing in the dormitories on campus. Most often that's the case. Even if you are a local student, a national student, US student, why am I having trouble with this? An American student looking for housing at an American university, you also have options to these dorms in very many universities. Some universities are based in cities and they may not have dorms, but the residential universities do. And in those cases, you may actually be required as a student to live on campus for the first year or two. Do you think universities in the US are doing this out of the goodness of their hearts? Oh no, they're doing this because those dorms are ridiculously priced. I would say they're about 50% more expensive than the rental market in that city or place wherever you're going to university. So that is also a problem, but it is different in that students are kind of bound to this rule of having to live on campus. So there is no choice. And also, universities are really expensive in the US, so everything just sucks. So you might as well have a place to live and shower. Now in the US, I have lived in New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. So these are all cities on the northeast of the US. And in these cities, I have rented various places. So that's where my experiences are coming from. Of course, as people like to say, the plural of anecdote is not evidence, so this is just me sharing my experiences to kind of give a sense of what I've experienced, and maybe that can help you out, or maybe it's just interesting for you to hear. So in the US, I have found that finding a place to rent is not difficult. In these three cities, when I've looked for places, I have maybe twice had a situation where I was viewing the place with another person or another interested party. And this is 2 times out of, I want to say 20, 25. So really not often. So based on my experiences, I would say that in New York and DC, it can be a little bit difficult to find a place, but it just does not compare to the Netherlands. And in Philadelphia, that is absolutely not the case. When I was still there a little over 2 years ago, not that long ago, it was so easy to find a place. Ridiculously easy. I would say a person had a choice between 2 or 3 places. And many of these places were actually quite affordable. I mean, depending on what neighborhood you're in. So Philadelphia, a big city with 1.6 million people roughly, it was easy to find a place. So I was totally unprepared for when I moved from Philadelphia, got completely spoiled there, to Amsterdam. And then I was looking in Amsterdam and Utrecht, 2 of the most notoriously difficult cities to find housing in the Netherlands. As promised, now let's get into those cultural differences. So I was surprised to learn that when finding a place, so even the searching process for a place was a bit different in the US versus the Netherlands. Now in the US, the site that many people like to use to find a place, I kid you not, is Craigslist. Now this is for renting, and of course there are also these rental companies that you can go to directly. That would be the equivalent of finding a place to rent in the Netherlands on Marktplaats. I was told that if you see a place there, be very, very suspicious or be very careful. I wonder if Dutch people find places on Marktplaats. That got me wondering. I've never done it. Okay, so leaving aside where you would look for these places, let's say in the US, you're looking for a place. In the cities that I've lived in, what I've done, looked for a place, saw a place that I liked, messaged the owner of that place or the person leasing it out and said, hey, I'm interested in the place. Person responds, I go take a look at the place. If I like it, I fill out an application sometimes, and then I get the place. There was one time in the US where I was looking for a room in a house and the roommates didn't pick me to live with them, so I didn't get that place. But literally every other place, apartment that I wanted to rent on my own or with other people or getting a room, I've always gotten the place. And it's not just my good luck, I just think that's how it goes, that housing is not that difficult when you're looking for a place to rent in the US. Now let me tell you what my process was like when I was looking for a place in the Netherlands. I looked on websites like Kamernet, Pararius. I mentioned I was part of some Facebook groups. So that's where I was looking. So let's say now in the Netherlands, I saw a place on Pararius. That is a really great rental website. Definitely the prices there tend to be higher than what you would get if you found a place through a person you knew who, had this really nice landlord who wanted to keep the prices low for nice people. I've heard that happening. But let's say you find a place on Pararius and you're like, oh my God, this place is amazing. And the place came up that morning. It was meant to be. And literally, if that place was posted, let's say at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday, and you message them 2 hours later, 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, I've done this several times. And then if you get a response, you are lucky. I would say my success rate with responses was 30%. That was actually mind-blowing to me because, again, in the US, I've never had a situation where I never got a response. But here, even 2 hours later, I would send a message, sometimes not get a response. Sometimes those nice people would send a response saying, there is too much demand for this place, so we don't even have a spot for you for a viewing. And you're thinking, oh, this is because of COVID, right? No, no, no. This was before COVID. They were literally full. There were so many people interested in some of these places that they wouldn't even send you a message back and you couldn't even get a viewing. Now, let's say you got a message saying, oh, congratulations, you are selected for a viewing. Okay, the congratulations part is a bit exaggerated, but the you have been selected for a viewing, definitely have gotten those messages before. And then they don't tell you, here are some times you could pick from, or they don't ask you what time could you come and view the apartment. They simply say, here is the time you will be viewing the apartment. And initially, the naive me that I was, when I just moved here, I would ask them, hey, can I view this place on a different date? And I would just get a one-line response saying, no, that is not possible. Okay, so fine, you get this email saying, here's when we expect you to show up to view the place, and you can't do anything about it. The part that really, really sucks is that those times tend to be during the workday. Now, I understand. In the Netherlands, many of these places have realtors. That was also a difference, whereas in the US, I mostly talked to people subletting or letting out their places that they own. So they were more individual owners, and they didn't really have a person helping them with the renting process. Even if you went to a rental company in the US, they would be a bit more flexible. Here in the Netherlands, these renters, they work during the day, during their workday, so they expect you to come look at the place during that workday. I have had an experience where some of these viewings were slightly later in the day, so maybe around 4 p.m. or even 5 p.m. That was a bit nicer, but some of these viewings were at 11 a.m. on a Wednesday. How is anyone supposed to make it to those viewings? Also, if you're American and watching this, you might be thinking, but Ava, that's what happens if you look for a place last minute. There was no option to look for a place other than last minute. That was another thing I discovered when I moved to the Netherlands. Dutch people will plan a coffee with you 3 months in advance. You want to go on holiday together? You could plan a year in advance. But when it comes to finding a place to live, a roof over your head, that all happens last minute. So if you're looking for a place, let's say starting December 1st, you could comfortably start looking mid-November and find several places available December 1st. If you were looking 3 months in advance, there would be almost no places that had a start date that was further out in the future. Now, I think that makes sense if you think about the fact that many people live in these apartments, they're working people, and maybe they give 1 month's notice to their landlord and say they're moving, so the landlord wants to find somebody immediately. I think that makes sense, but in the US, for one reason or another, there are places that are available now, or many of these places actually require you to say whether you're renewing your lease or not months in advance if that place is through a rental company. And in those cases, yes, it's really annoying when you live there, and as a tenant, you have to say, yes, it's October, but I want to let you know I'm moving out in June the next year. It's very strange. But as a person looking for a place to rent, that gives you way more time to find something. Here, not the case. Everything is last minute, and then oftentimes you'll end up having an overlap if you decide to move from one place to another. In the US, I don't know how that works because sometimes you have to move into a place on the 1st of the month, and then you're leaving your other place on the 31st. It's a bit tricky in terms of how you want to get your stuff from one place to another. And I've even spoken to some landlords because when I get a new place, we often have this conversation like, okay, so how do you want to do this? Because I would like to have the place cleaned for you. Oh, I'm not even there yet, but he'll say things like, yeah, so I want to have the place ready for you and you want to move in, but how are we doing this? Can I have a bit more time? So then you would actually end up with a more flexible start date, or maybe you can move in your things earlier because it's just kind of in the US, you're expected to do everything overnight. I don't know how that works. The system is not great, but here you'll have an overlap in the Netherlands, and so you will have more than enough time to move your stuff, unless of course you're living somewhere temporarily, and then that makes things easier. Another difference, in the US, you will typically find places that are furnished. These are often for students or just people who move around in cities and They just don't want to be bothered buying furniture. And I think that's also the culture around renting. Sometimes they think that if you're renting a place, you wouldn't like to buy furniture for it. I don't know why. But you can also get places that come unfurnished. That's also really common in the US. And when you move into these places, furnished or not, most of the times, I would say 90% of the times, that place is clean and it comes equipped with, well, basic appliances like a kitchen and all the kitchen appliances, like a microwave maybe. Now that one can be optional, but like a fridge, definitely, because it's a kitchen, it needs a fridge. And let's say it comes with floors. And again, Americans watching this are thinking, why is she talking about a place that has floors or a fridge? These are all basic amenities. And in the US, of course, they'll make sure that the place is a little bit cleaned up and so that you don't have to move into a dirty place when you move in. In the Netherlands, what that last tenant has left for you is what you get. If that previous tenant did not clean up, the landlord will not be cleaning up that place for you. You move into a place and it is yours. So good luck cleaning it. They also will not be doing any paint jobs. And this is the best part. When you're looking for places, you have 3 options in the Netherlands. Not just furnished and unfurnished. You have furnished, upholstered, which is a fancy unfurnished apartment that comes with the amenities. So it's what an American would consider unfurnished. And cold or kaal, or like a shell. I think that's what I've seen in the English translations. And I don't look at those because those places often don't come with floors. You have to bring the floor yourself. This is completely unimaginable to me. I've never moved in a place in the Netherlands that did not have floors. And I don't see myself doing this anytime soon because I'm so unhandy. I cannot imagine doing that. Also, these places don't tend to come with a kitchen or a fully functional one. So you need to bring your own fridge. I just don't understand. So how did the Netherlands end up with this situation? Like, did Dutch people just decide, I really like the floors of this place, so I'm taking it with me? Good luck, the next person moving in. Another difference that I've noticed when you go to view a place in the Netherlands and the US, and this is pre-COVID, that in the Netherlands, do not be surprised if you just end up in a room full of people looking at this apartment. The apartment could be tiny, and it will be full, flowing with people who are trying to charm the makelaar, the realtor. I have never seen anything like this. Like I said, in the US, I have mostly just seen places by myself at a time that was convenient for me. Here in the Netherlands, it's in the middle of the day. I am in a room with, I kid you not, like 30 other people, and I had to pick between one of 2 time slots, so I can imagine there were 60 people viewing this place. And it was an okay place, but everyone was charming this realtor and talking to him and trying to get him to pay attention to them. It was very strange. Again, to me, I was completely out of my comfort zone because I felt like the realtor should be convincing me to get the place. I shouldn't be convincing the realtor that, he should pick me for this place. Those days are gone. I definitely know better now. But at the time, I was completely shocked. So if you move to the Netherlands, be prepared for this. I know with COVID, it's a bit different. You get appointments to see a place, but even then you will get 10 minutes. And even then, you should probably talk to the realtor and, make sure they remember you so that you can be selected to get this place. And a final difference I wanted to talk about between renting in the US and the Netherlands. And this is absolutely 100% the reason why I love renting in the Netherlands. Besides the fact that the apartments in the Netherlands are gorgeous and old and beautiful, not always, but they're quite nice, is that in the Netherlands, you can get a permanent contract when you're renting. In the US, you are very much dependent on your landlord, and oftentimes you get a 1-year or 2-year contract, or it's a 1-year contract that gets renewed every year. In the Netherlands, if you have a 1-year contract, oftentimes that 1-year contract will be converted into a permanent contract if the landlord is happy with you. What that means is the landlord cannot just randomly kick you out. There are lots of laws protecting the tenants, and I absolutely love that. I also love the fact that knowing that you could live in a place permanently just makes you feel like even though it's a rental place, it is your own place. And in the US, I never had that feeling. And on that note, I wanted to end this video here, but of course, I wasn't able to talk about everything about renting in the Netherlands and the US in this one short video. So if you have something you would like to share with the community, let us know in the comments down below. I myself would love to read what you have to say. And as usual, thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to hit that button. And until next time,